Hotel, everybody. Welcome back to Matthew Daniels TV. I'm your host, Matthew Daniels, the author, the writer, the scribe, and the bookworm. But I'm not just a bookworm world, I am the real bookworm. Make sure you get it right. And as always, may your name live on forever, and may your memory, family, never die. Y'all see the title. Today, we're going to be dealing with slave ships. Okay, today we're going to be dealing with slave ships. I a couple of days ago, I was watching YouTube and I was watching Sidenet on YouTube, and he had a gentleman on by the name of Rod Hayes. And while I was watching the video, the guy made a very strange claim. He claimed that our ancestors did not come to the Americas on slave ships. His general idea or theme or his position seems to be that our people were always here, as if we are the Native Americans, we are indigenous to this land, and the whole notion of our ancestors coming from the continent of Africa to be enslaved in the Americas on slave ships is a lie. Now, honestly, that's not the first time I heard someone say that we did not come on slave ships. There were no slave ships. There's no way that you could transport the amount of people that they say were transported from Africa to the Americas on slave ships. So I have heard this thing challenged before. And when I watched the video and I saw this guy saying this on Sinetta, I thought, well, you know what? I think this would be a good topic for me to address, because you guys know I'm all about defending the ancestors. I'm all about giving the real, true, accurate history of our ancestors. And just the truth be told, um, our ancestors did come on slave ships. Now, I'm not saying whether or not individuals from the continent of Africa traveled over to these shores prior to the transatlantic slave trade. But what I'm saying is the vast majority of our ancestors come from the continent of Africa. And when they got here, some of them intermixed and interbred with the Native Americans. And so some of us, we do have Native Americans, we do have indigenous people in our lineages, but our primary ancestors did come from Africa on slave ships. So what I'm going to do in this video here, I'm going to present um pretty much irrefutable evidence of the slave ships to hopefully put this notion that our ancestors did not come on slave ships. Hopefully, I can put that notion to bed and end it. So before I get into it, what I want to do, I want to share my screen, and I'm going to take you guys to the video that I watched on Sinetta, and I'm going to let you guys hear what this gentleman said, so you will actually hear it for yourself firsthand, and you'll know exactly what I'm responding to. I hope Sanet, if he sees this, don't strike my channel. I'm just going to be using a couple of minutes of your footage just so my people can know what it is I'm actually addressing. And after I play this, I'm going to go into it. I'm going to show you the ancestors themselves claiming to be brought over here on slave ships from Africa. And I'm going to show you irrefutable proof of slave ships. And hopefully, the individuals that are trying to teach this misinformation that our ancestors did not come on ships, hopefully that they'll stop teaching that. Now, if an individual wants to teach that they themselves are indigenous to the land, they're Native Americans, they're Indians, whatever they want to call it, then that's their right. Your history is your history. I just don't like when people try to change my ancestors' history. I know the accurate history of my ancestors, and I'm just tired of people twisting it and lying about who we really are. So let's watch this short clip. It's just going to be a couple of minutes, and then we're going to get into the evidence, family. Thanks for tapping in. Here we go.
Yeah. Y'all already know what it is. It's your brother Sarnetta. We back in effect. Get this information to the people. You already know what it is. I'm here with the legend, Rod Hayes is in the building, man. So I want to definitely, I know a lot of people out there know who this brother is. I've been checking him out. I'm the one that's late. You know what I'm saying? I'm the brother that's late, but the brother know who I am. The brother been out there giving and delivering this information. And I just came up with a title. That's not the brother title. I came up with the title because I mean, that's a question I'm going to ask him. We have always been here, not in Africa, but blacks in America. So we're going to figure this out and see where he go with that. So without any further ado, my brother Rod, introduce yourself to the audience. Let them know what you're about, my brother. Peace.
Your brother Sarnetta. First off, peace to the guys and earths. I've been teaching for about the last 5 years in the public domain, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. And a lot of people don't know the real history, right? We all know that history is a lie that's agreed upon. How we know it? Because they told us. Who told us? The people who was writing history. So if they told us it's a lie that they all agreed upon, what's the truth? Where is our real historical information? We have to first understand who we are before we can begin to reconstruct our history. We started with the slave ship narrative. The slave ship narrative is illogical and unreasonable when analyzed with critical thinking, right? So they have trade ships that wasn't slave ships from the same contemporary time. They have ships that's older from people who had shipwrecked transporting gold and silver. You can go to YouTube and Google shipwrecks on YouTube, and they'll show you all these shipwrecks, but none of them is a slave ship. We have been yet to find an intact slave ship to verify the slave narrative that they gave us. So, being that I'm come from under the banner of Larry Hoover, Growth and Development.
Okay, all right. So that's enough of that. So we basically see that he's challenging the idea that our ancestors came on slave ships from Africa. One of his reasonings for saying that is he says that history is a lie that's agreed upon, right? History is a lie that's agreed upon. And he's saying that no one has found any ships, and so that also verifies that our ancestors did not come on any ships. But what we're going to do, hold on real quick, we got somebody commenting in the chat. Brother, the autochthonous Americans were melanin dominant and did not arrive on slave ships. Oh, okay. I'm glad you're in the comment section saying that. I'm glad you're in the comment section saying that, because yes, there were individuals here in this landmass before our ancestors came from Africa on ships. And a lot of times, like the brother did in the video, they try to say that, oh, we only believe that we came to the Americas on slave ships because that's what the European, the colonizer, that's what the individuals that enslaved us told us. So what I'm going to do, family, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to don't believe me. Don't believe the individuals that are alive when I'm alive. that's saying our ancestors didn't come on slave ships. We can actually go into the historical record and ask our ancestors themselves, where did they come from? And that's why I'm always talking about letting the ancestors speak. Why am I always talking about letting the ancestors speak? Because when you hear it from their mouths, right? When you hear it from their mouths, where they say they came from, it gets very, very, very hard to dispute the information, right? So let me get right into this. Let me get right into this PowerPoint. And the first thing that I'm going to do, is show you the ancestors discussing it. So we have Rod Hayes telling Sa Neter that we did not come on slave ships. Okay. Matter of fact, let me get to where I can make this big. I want to blow this up. All right. So the question that we're asking ourselves, family, did our ancestors come on ships? What is the evidence? What is the evidence? Is there any evidence that our ancestors came to these shores on ships, or is this a lie made up by the colonizers? Now, I always tell you guys, when you're doing some of your own research, I want you guys to look into something that's called the slave narrative. Because what happened in the early 1900s, they went around all around the country. They went to South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Oklahoma, Texas, Georgia, Arkansas, Mississippi. They went all around and they found individuals who were actually enslaved and individuals who were born a couple of years after the Civil War. And they interviewed them and asked them about what did they remember about slavery? Where were they enslaved at? Where was the plantation? Who owned them? How were they treated? What did they eat? What holidays did were they allowed to celebrate? What was church like on the plantation? And so they allowed our ancestors to give their own firsthand accounts. And not only that, you also have individuals who escaped to freedom, like Frederick Douglass, for instance. Oluwadu Equiano, for instance, and a whole host of others who told their narratives. And this genre is known as slave narratives, where we actually have our ancestors themselves telling their stories. And so what you're going to find out when you actually dig into some of these narratives of what our ancestors said, and you look for them talking about coming on ships, you're going to see them talking about their father, their mother, their grandmother, passing down stories of them coming on ships from Africa. Not the information coming from the European, not the information coming from the colonizer, not the information coming from me, not the information coming from you, but the information coming from the primary sources. So where we're going to go to first, family, we're going to go to ancestor Richard Jones. This is out of the South Carolina slave narrative. And this brother is going to describe to us how his grandmother came directly from Africa on a ship. They keep asking, where are the ships? Where are the ships? Did our ancestors really come on ships? Well, they said they did, family. When you look into his description of his grandmother, we're going to go to where it says, yes. Let's go to that paragraph right there. Let's get right into it. The ancestor says, yes. Well, does I remember my granny from Africa? Right off the bat, his granny is from Africa. Right off the bat. That's not me telling you that. Yes. Well, does I remember my granny from Africa, and straight from there too. Judith Gist, they named her. That old lady could not work when she died, for she was 110 years old. They had in the paper that I was 125. It gives me notice to say that I is the oldest man in Union County. Can't remember any of my grandfathers. Millie Gist was my mother, and Aunt Judith was her mother. Look what he says. Granny Judith said that in Africa they had very few pretty things and that they had no red colors in cloth. In fact, they had no cloth at all. Some strangers with pale faces come one day and dropped a small piece of red flannel down on the ground. All the black folks grabbed for it. Then a larger piece was dropped a little further on and on until the river was reached. Then a large piece was dropped in the river and on the other side. So what we're seeing is they're describing that individuals with pale faces, Europeans, came to the coast of Africa and encountered this man's grandmother in Africa and some others. Now his grandmother was young when this took place, and I imagine there was some more children around when this took place. And what they did to entice them and to pretend like they were friendly, they took out some red pieces of cloth, some red flannel cloth that the natives to Africa didn't have, and they laid it on the ground and walked away. And so to kind of calm the fears of the native Africans. And so the children came out once the white folk walked away, and they came and they picked up the red flannel. And so they're looking at it, they're examining it. It's something that they never seen before. And so they're feeling more comfortable. Okay, this individual with the pale face may be a friend that just gave me a gift. And so what they kind of did to trick these children, they began to make a trail. They laid down a little piece of cloth here and walked away a little bit, and laid down another one and walked away a little bit, laid down another one and walked away a little bit, kind of making a trail of these red cloths, this red flannel, these quote unquote gifts, trying to entice these children, leading them towards the boat like a goddamn kidnapper. Right, like a goddamn kidnapper, like a individual pulling up in the van, saying some children, "Hey, I got candy and toys in the van." What the children gonna do? If you haven't taught them about strangers, they gonna go up to the van and they might get snatched up. Just picture it in your mind. This is what happened to this man's grandmother. He goes on to say, they was led on, each one trying to get a piece as it was dropped. Finally, when the ship was reached, now I highlighted that because we're talking about slave ships, that our ancestors come on ships. They keep trying to push this narrative like there were no ships, like our ancestors didn't come on ships. So I made sure I highlighted ship so we can see I'm not saying ship, you're not saying ship, the colonizer is not saying ship, the African is saying ship. Finally, when the ship was reached, they dropped large pieces on the plank and up into the ship till they got as many blacks on board as they wanted. Then the gate was chained up and they could not get back. Look at this. That is the way Granny Judith say they got her to America. Now, there were several different ways our ancestors were scooped up on the continent of Africa. Like this right here. Some of the children were snatched up, kidnapped. Some of them were lied to and enticed onto the ship. And when they got on the ship just took off. And when they were out in the middle of the water, the individual Africans didn't know what to do. They couldn't just jump in and swim back to land because they were out too far. Some of our ancestors were captured by other African tribes, and they were held in bondage inside of castles and forts on the coast of West Africa, and they were sold to the Europeans who brought them over here on ships. But this ancestor right here says that is the way Granny Judith say they got her to America. Not that Granny Judith was always here, but Granny Judith came on a ship from Africa. And that's what we're talking about right now, because everybody want to ask, where are the ships? Where are the ships? Is the ship narrative even real? Where did the ship narrative come from? I'm showing you the ancestors talking about the ships. Look, he goes on to say, when they got on board the ship, they were tied until the ship got to sea. Then they was let loose to walk about because they couldn't jump overboard. On the ship, they had many strange things to eat, and they liked that. They was give enough red flannel to wrap around themselves. She liked it on the boat. Granny Judith born Millie, and Millie born me. No, I ain't never had no desire to go to Africa because I going to stay where I is. And so what I decided to do, I put this picture on the screen because an individual to see a picture like this. Hold on just a second. Brittany Harden, appreciate you tapping in. She says, right, the information is in their narratives. Though there may have been some that were native to this land, most were brought here against their will. Exactly. And Q and did Hater, I apologize if I'm pronouncing that wrong, says my family's narrative is different. We are Cherokee Indians from Stewart and Monroe counties in Georgia. We have always been taught we are not African. Now, again, Q and did Hater. I don't mind that, right? I don't mind that. But what if you was here in the beginning? I played the video of the brother Roy Hayes trying to deny the fact that individuals from Africa came over here on ships. Now, if you're native to this land, if that's your story, that's your story. But we can't be out here claiming that Africans were not brought to America on ships. That's what I'm saying. We can't change somebody else's history. If that's not your history, fine. But we can't say that didn't happen because it did. We can't say that there were no slave ships because there were. We can't say that individual Africans weren't captured, taken from their homes, taken from their homelands, snatched from their mothers, their fathers, their brothers, their sisters, their children, chained up in the bottom of boats, beat, brought over here and enslaved. That is historical reality. And I heard the brother saying that the slave ship narrative is unrealistic when you use critical thinking. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to show emphatically that the slave ship narrative is real. Now, if somebody else, if their family always been here, that's fine. Commentator says this is the first I ever heard anyone ever claim there were no ships. Yeah, you may not hear it too much. Whenever you get time, go back to the beginning of the video. I started it. I played a couple of minutes of the individual that I heard saying it on Sonetta. Okay, and they'll say stuff like the slave trade was in reverse, but I'm not going to get into all of that. But so what I did, I put this picture on next to that part because individuals will see these drawings, and because it's not an actual photograph like we have photographs now, they'll try to make it seem like images like this are completely made up. But when we look into the records that our ancestors left themselves, we find out that the ancestors themselves tell us that they came from Africa, and they tell us that they came on a boat. He even says, my granny never could speak good like I can. She talk half African and all African when she get bothered. No, I can't talk no African. So we see as the generations went on, some of our ancestors were losing their connection to their past, but they knew how they got here. Let's move on. Now, this is another slave narrative. I'm going to show you that this is not an isolated case. This is the ancestor Richard Carruthers, and his narrative is found in the Texas slave narrative. Okay, we're in a whole nother state. Let's see what he has to say about how did his ancestors get here. Did his ancestors come on a ship, or were his ancestors always here? He says, and we're just going to go straight to the highlighted part. I don't have time to read the entire narrative, but he says, my grandma and grandpa come here in a steamboat. The man come to Africa and say, man and woman, does you want a job? So they get on the boat, and then he has the advantage. So some of our ancestors were kidnapped. Some of our ancestors were tricked. And a lot of our ancestors were captured by other African tribes and sold to the Europeans. But we're talking about, did anybody come from Africa on ships? Did that narrative come from the European? No. I'm showing you another individual who was born in slavery, ancestor Richard Carruthers, and he's saying that his grandmother and his grandfather came from Africa to the Americas in a boat, on a ship. But let's go a little further, family. How about Thomas Jones, another individual that you can find his story in the Texas slave narrative? He says, and now this is even more direct because this isn't a grandfather or a grandmother, this is his father. He says, my father's name was George and my mother's name was Nellie. My father was born in Africa. Was his father from here? No. My father was born in Africa. Him and two of his brothers and one sister were stole and brought to Savannah, Georgia, and sold. They was the children of a chief of the Comanche tribe. Now remember that they kidnapped the children of a chief. That may sound impossible now, but as we go further, I'm going to show you more evidence of even the royals in Africa were not safe. They were not immune to the horrors of the slave trade. He says, the way they was stole, they was asked to a dance on a ship which some white man had. And my aunt said it was early in the morning when they found they was away from the land and all they could see was the water all around. So they were tricked onto a boat, invited to some kind of a dance or party. And while they were on the boat doing their thing, probably in some of the lower quarters, the boat just took off. And by the time they realized it, all they could see around them was water. They didn't even know how to get back to land, get back to where they was from. Next thing you know, they pulling up to the shores of America, and they're being sold on the auction block. Now that sounds a lot like the other individual who his grandmother said they were led to the boat by an individual dropping red pieces of cloth. And when they got on the boat, they just dropped the plank and the boat just took off. Imagine, because he's saying that his father was a child. His father was a child. It's like they went over there, they just kidnapped a bunch of kids. This individual right here. And if you have to think about it, even now in this modern age, child trafficking is a problem, even in this modern age. So don't be confused. Don't think it sounds so far-fetched, because that's even a problem right now. Kids get kidnapped all the time, never to be seen again. Traffic it somewhere. This is what they were doing, or this is what happened to this man's father, right? So the individual Rod Hayes, he went on Sinetta, and he was trying to say that the slave ship narrative is illogical. Illogical how? Illogical where? A lot of times people, they're just not aware of these narratives. Honestly, if you go back 10 years, I didn't even know that these narratives existed. I didn't even know that these narratives existed. But now that I do, I've been reading through them extensively. And so some of the information I have on what our ancestors have to say for themselves, I'm well aware of it. Now look at this. I want to show y'all something. And I hope Q and Did Hater is still in the building. Look at this. And I'm gonna make this make sense. Look, right where the hand is moving at. He says, my mother was born a slave in Virginia. Now remember, his father came from Africa. His mother was born in Virginia. So she was born in the Americas. My mother was born a slave in Virginia. She married there and had a little girl. And they were sold away from the husband and brought to Alabama. Watch this. She said her mother was part Indian and part nigger. I'm going to say it again. She said the mother that was born a slave in Virginia, she said her mother was part Indian and part nigger. Now, why is that important? That's important because they knew what an Indian was. They knew what a Native American was. They knew what an indigenous American was. And they identified a difference. Hear me good. They identified a difference between the Indian and the Negro. They're saying nigger right here, but you know, this is how they talk. But they're making a difference between the Indian and the Negro. They understand what an Indian is. They know what a Native American is. They know what an indigenous person is. They're not confused. Do you understand? Do you understand what I'm telling you? They're clear when they're saying, hey, my father was from Africa, right? Now, my grandmother was part Negro, African, born in America, and part Indian. They knew and understood a difference between the Native Americans and the indigenous population. Don't let that go over your head. Do not let that go over your head, because another thing that they'll like to say is that, oh, the European began to manipulate the census, and as they manipulated the census, they started calling all of the Native Americans Negroes and blacks. Now, which they may have manipulated some of the census. I don't know. But what I'm saying is our ancestors knew the difference. There is a difference between the individuals that came from Africa, and there is a difference between the Native American. So when we hear our ancestors talking and they're saying Negro, they're saying African, they're saying black, they're saying nigger, they know that they're not talking about the Native American or the indigenous population. There's a clear difference that they understand. So if an individual is an Indian, if they are Native American, if they are indigenous, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine. But let's not play this game like you won't take away or you will not rewrite history. You just ain't gonna rewrite history. That's all I'm saying. We know what happened to our ancestors. Now look, let's go a little further. We're gonna look at another one. The oldest ones come right from Africa. We're going to look for that quote. Now, this is ancestor John Brown. Now we're looking at the Oklahoma slave narratives. I already showed you what. It was either North or South Carolina. We went to Texas 2 times. Now we're going to go to another one. I'm showing you multiple of the ancestors saying this. So don't believe me. Don't believe Rod Hayes. Matter of fact, don't believe nobody that's alive today. How about we ask them, where did you come from? Check this out. According to the ancestors, most of the time, there was more than 300 slaves on the plantation, the particular plantation that they were on. The oldest ones come right from Africa. Now, I just showed you. They understood the difference between an Indian and an African. So this ancestor is saying the oldest ones on the plantation came right from Africa. My grandmother was one of them. A savage in Africa, a slave in America. Mammy told it to me. Over there, all the natives dressed naked and lived on fruits and nuts. Never see many white men. One day, a big ship, remember, they want to know what a ship's are at. Were there really any slave ships? Or is our ancestors delusional? Are they delusional? One day, a big ship stopped off the shore, and the natives of Africa, hid in the brush along the beach. Grandmother was there. The shipmen sent the little boat to the shore and scattered bright things and trinkets on the beach. The natives were curious. Grandmother said everybody made a rush for them things soon as the boat left. The trinkets was fewer than the people's. Next day, the white folks scattered some more. there was another scramble. The natives was feeling less scared, and the next day, some of them walked up the gangplank to get things off the plank and off the deck. The deck was covered with things like they'd found on the beach. 200 to 300 natives on the ship when they felt it move. They rushed to the side, but the plank was gone, just dropped in the water when the ship moved away. Now, how are these individuals who were enslaved on different plantations in totally different states, how do they have the same story? Remember, the first one I read you, the individual's grandmother said they laid down red pieces of flannel and enticed them and led them on the boat. And when they got on the ship just took off. It was like, this is how they knew to kidnap. This was their kidnapping practices. And the reason why I included this one, because there was a plethora of narratives that I could include. But the reason I included this one is because people will say, how could they even fit that many people on the ship at one time and bring them over here? Well, you got the ancestors saying that there was 200 to 300 natives on the ship when they felt it move. Not the Europeans saying it, not me saying it, not you saying it. This the ancestors telling you their own story. They telling you their own story. Look, folks on the beach started to crying and shouting. The ones on the boat was wild with fear. Grandmother was one of them who got fooled. And she say the last thing seen of that place, her homeland, God bless her heart, was the natives running up and down the beach, waving their arms and shouting like they was mad. The boatmen come up from below where they had been a hiding and drive the slaves down in the bottom and keep them quiet with the whips and clubs. Look at the picture. You'll see a picture like that. You'll think that's just a drawing, but that's what happened. They enticed them onto the ship, tricked them, pulled out their weapons, put them in the bottom, held them till they brought them to the Americas, and then they sold them to the highest bidder. This ancestor is talking about 200 to 300 natives on a ship. Where are the ships? Are we making up the ships? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So this man, and honestly, when I watched the video, this guy, he seemed pretty cool. Even when people challenge his information. So I don't even know him. I don't have no problems with him. I'm just using him as a springboard into the conversation because he's the one that I heard say it. So this could really go for anybody who denied the ship. But so this man says our ancestors did not come on ships, but our ancestors themselves say they did come on ships. And our ancestors clearly understood the difference between an Indian and an African. So who are you going to believe? I choose to believe the ancestors, right? Now, what other evidence do we have? Can hundreds of captives really fit on a ship? Individuals will see images like this and they'll say that this type of thing is impossible, but we just saw an ancestor whose grandmother was brought on a ship with 200 to 300 other captives as well. Now I want y'all to look at something, family. Look at this. This was in the newspaper, the Augusta Chronicle and Gazette of the State, from on January the 23rd, 1790. So we're going all the way back to the 1700s. And I want to show you guys a newspaper clipping, right? Hold on just a second. QN Did Hater says there were fully functioning cameras as early as the late 1820s. Slavery did not end until 1865. Do you have any information that shows what they would not have actually photographed fully loaded ships? See, there we go. So I'll just keep watching, but while we're right here, do you think that those ancestors are just lying about what happened to them. They're just lying. They just making it up. They're just making it up. You do it. Is their word not good enough? Huh? That's what we got to answer. Should you believe me? Should you believe the individuals saying that there was no ships, or should you believe the individuals that was enslaved who said, "Hey, this is how I got in this situation"? Now look at this. We're going back to the 1700s, right? Clipping from the newspaper. Maybe they were in on the conspiracy even way back then. They were playing games. But look at this, family. For sale, a small cargo of prime slaves just arrived from the river Gambia to be disposed of for cash or produce. For particulars, apply to the subscriber. Richard Wayne, Savannah, September 22nd, 1789. So we even have newspaper clippings from the 1700s advertising a cargo of captured enslaved individuals coming from the river Gambia, right? So where is the river Gambia? First, let's look at this little small section. That red square is West Africa, Northwest Africa, okay? And in Northwest Africa, you have Gambia. And right here, you have the river Gambia, the Gambia River, right? For sale, a small cargo of prime slaves just arrived from the river Gambia. Just arrived from right here. Just arrived from right here. Now I'm going to show y'all something. Give me just a second. Now I want y'all to pay attention to this. Richard Wayne, Savannah, September 22nd, 1789. Now to give more credibility, to that, right? Hold on to your seat. Hold on to your seat, family. I'm finna show y'all something. Let's do entire screen. Oh, y'all. And look at this. We're gonna go to slavery.princeton.edu. James Moore Wayne. Now, who is James Moore Wayne? Look, born to Richard Wayne. Now remember, Richard Wayne was the name that we saw on that newspaper clipping. Now this guy was born to Richard Wayne, a wealthy Savannah merchant. Remember on the newspaper clipping it said Savannah, September 22nd. Born to Richard Wayne, a wealthy Savannah merchant and planter who owned more than 100 slaves and traded in them as well. So we have in the historical record this Richard Wayne of Savannah who traded in slaves. He is a actual real person, right? He is a actual real person. So the newspaper article, right? The newspaper article is definitely not forged. Okay, it's definitely not forged. This is real. For sale, a small cargo of prime slaves just arrived from the river Gambia to be disposed of for cash or produce. Richard Wayne, Savannah, September 22nd, 1789. So where are the ships? He had this guy here. This guy here was dealing in them. You're looking at some evidence for the ships right here. Not only did the ancestors tell you that this is how their family got to these shores, you even have the advertisements for the shiploads, the boatloads of our ancestors showing up. Okay, he says, no, I don't think they're lying. I think that there are numerous families of melanin dominant people in the Americas. Again, if somebody family has always been here, that's fine. That's fine. But no one can say, this is all I'm telling you, no one can say that these people did not go to Africa, right? Load our people up on ships and bring them to the Americas to enslave them. That happened. That's a reality. That's a fact of history. And they knew the difference, fam. They knew the difference between an Indian and an African. That's matter. Oh, let me go back real quick. Just real quick. Just let me do. I'm gonna do this for you. I'm gonna do this for you. Look, bro. My mother was born a slave in Virginia. She married there and had a little girl, and they were sold away from the husband and brought to Alabama. She said her mother was part Indian and part nigger. So they understood. Yes, it was. Indians are real. Native Americans are real. Indigenous people are real. Yes, there were people here. But there is a clear difference between the Native Americans and the people from Africa. Now, they did mix. They did have children together. The Native Americans are not Europeans. They're not white folk. Yes, they had color to their skin. You know, I'm not denying none of that. But I'm saying when somebody tries to say that, oh, the slave trade is false, they didn't go to Africa and bring millions of people from Africa to the Americas, that's just not true. I did another video where I clearly show you got right now today, you have African nations apologizing. Like they are apologizing for selling other Africans to the Europeans. They apologizing for it. They wouldn't apologize for it if they didn't do it. Brittany Harden says, why would they photograph the inside of the ships? They didn't see them as anything precious enough to have evidence of. Exactly. You understand what I'm saying? They were shipping so much stuff anyway. They weren't taking pictures of every single ship. They weren't taking pictures of all of the cargo. But it's clear that these ships are real. It's clear. Look, let's go further. Now check this out. This is another newspaper article from Williamsburg, Virginia, and I wanted to bounce around state to state. From Williamsburg, Virginia, the Gazette. Now, this was posted in the newspaper July 9th, 1772. Now, mind you, see, I'm taking you back to the 1700s. Now, this finna get good. This finna get real good. Look, just arrived from Africa. Look at this. I want you to get a good look. Just arrived from Africa. The Snow Nancy. Yeah, they talking about boats. This is one of the boats right here. Nancy, the Snow Nancy, a slave ship. Just arrived from Africa, the Snow Nancy, James E. Colley commander, with about 250 fine, healthy Windward and Gold Coast slaves, the sale of which will begin at, I can't make out that word, on James River, that's in Virginia, on Wednesday, the 29th instant July, and continue until all are sold. Merchant notes payable at the general courts in Williamsburg will be received in payment. So here we have another newspaper article. This is not forged. This is a real clipping. Well, I don't have the physical clipping. It's the digital copy of the clipping. But they're clearly telling you that they got a shipload of 250 captured Africans from Africa, from the Gold Coast, on a ship called the Snow Nancy. Now we're going to do the same thing we did with the other one. Where, oh, where is the Gold Coast? What you're looking at again, you're looking at the west coast of Africa. Now let me zoom in. See what it says Gold Coast, Guyana, Gold Coast, Guyana, right here. The Gold Coast. You got the Grain Coast next to it. You got the Slave Coast next to it. You got Benin. Now, Benin is, in history, they're known as the Kingdom of Dahomey. Dahomey was selling slaves to the Europeans. They were capturing other Africans and selling them. Okay? But look, they said that they had slaves from the Gold Coast. Where is the Gold Coast? It's not Brazil. It's not North America. It's not Central America. It's not South America. It's West Africa. It's West Africa. Just arrived from Africa, the Snow Nancy, right? The Snow 250 healthy Windward and Gold Coast slaves. They want to know where the slave ships are. Here go one, the Snow Nancy. Could they bring hundreds of people? Yes. This one had 250 on it, coming straight from the Gold Coast. Now, I want y'all to check this out. Now, if you go to the website, library.princeton.edu, I took a screenshot of the actual web page so I wouldn't have to go back to the website itself. But look, records from the slave ship Nancy still exist. This right here, the Snow Nancy, that's in this article, records from that slave ship still exist. They have documents from the account book of the slave ship Nancy from the 1700s. Look, although Rhode Island enacted a law in 1787 forbidding its citizens to participate in the slave trade, the ship Nancy, captained by James B. Cook, continued to sail from Providence to the upper Guyana coast between 1791 and 1803, trading rum and other goods for African slaves. This account book records the number and price of slaves and the South American plantation owners who purchased them. Now, check this out. Now, this historical evidence about the slave ship Nancy tells you that they continued to sail from Providence to the upper Guyana coast between 1791 and 1803. Remember that, upper Guyana coast. Why is that important? He says in 1772, right, that they had just arrived from Africa with 250 slaves from the Gold Coast. And again, where is the Gold Coast? Guyana, Guyana, Guyana. Look what the historical record tells us. The ship Nancy continued to sail from Providence to upper Guyana coast, Gold Coast, between 1791 and 1803. All of the evidence is lining up. And even when you get a good look at the actual log from the slave ship Nancy, now this is kind of hard to read, I'm not going to lie. And this is the best I can zoom in. But like you look right here from the log books, look, girl, slave. Right where my hand at. Girl, slave. Look, go down a little bit. Man, slaves. Like 7, 5 women, slaves. See that? Go down a little bit further. Woman, slave. Small girl, slave. Very bottom. Boy, slave. Actual logs from the slave ship Nancy talking about the slaves being cargo. Did they doctor this up? Is all of this evidence fake? Brittany says photography was a thing, but it wasn't that sophisticated. Sketches were probably the only option, but having evidence probably wasn't priority. I've been a historian since 1989. I was not trained on Google. I complete and I study peers research. My peers research. I have no anger with you. This is another suppressed narrative. Oh no. I don't know if you're talking to me or if that's a oh no, that makes it be a conversation in the chat. But if you were talking to me, like, yeah, nah, I don't take none of this personal, man. We're just talking about information. But yeah, the slave ships are real. You know, slave ships are real. Now check this out. In the late 1700s, the slave trade became illegal in Britain. It became illegal to import slaves from Africa to Great Britain, right? Now, in America, it became illegal in 1808. Now, that doesn't mean it stopped. People still did it illegally, but the transportation of enslaved individuals from the coast of Africa to the Americas became illegal in America in 1808. Now, it's kind of good. Well, nah, scratch that. Hell no, it ain't good. I misspoke. It ain't good at all. But the fact that it continued on even after it was illegal, put more evidence for me to find that proves that these quote unquote slave ships are real. It's more evidence out there because it was illegal and people continue to do it. There were more conversations about it that are in the historical record right now today. So in the Milledgeville Reflector newspaper, December 15th, 1818, page 6, we find such a reference to this illegal slave trade. Okay? Now remember, this is 1818 that this newspaper clipping was in the newspaper, and it became illegal in 1808. So basically, what I'm gonna read it to you and I'm gonna explain what they're saying. Look, the slave trade on our borders. The following facts have been communicated from such authority as leaves us no room to doubt their authenticity. It is a common practice at New Orleans to send an agent abroad to the West Indies and even Africa to purchase a cargo of slaves. Right? We're talking about slave ships going to Africa. They are then brought to the United States for about 1/3 what they can be purchased at here. So soon as the slave ship arrives off the Belize, the agent leaves her and goes in the most expeditious manner to New Orleans, where he gives information to the proper authority that a certain vessel, the ship, the boat, is in the Mississippi River, said to be bound to New Orleans, and having on board a certain number of Negro slaves, contrary to the law of the United States. The vessel and cargo are libeled, and the slaves are sold at public venue and purchased cheap by common consent for the account of the original importer. 1/2 of the purchased money goes to the United States and the other half to the informer, who, as before mentioned, is the agent of the owner of the slaves. Thus, after all expenses, the Negro slaves are imported at less than half what they would cost in the United States. In this way, not less than 10,000 slaves have been imported into Louisiana in the year last past. So what are they talking about? Now, when the slave trade became illegal, if you were caught bringing in slaves illegally into the Americas, the government would confiscate the boat, confiscate the quote unquote cargo, and they would then sell the slaves themselves, and the government would take half the money, and whoever snitched and told them that this illegal shipment came in would take half of the money. So what the slave traders did to get around the law that it was illegal, they would take the ships to Africa, load up on enslaved people that well, they weren't enslaved there, but load up on captive people that they were going to sell into slavery, bring them to the Americas. Then they would have someone who was really working for the owner of the ship go to the proper authorities and quote unquote snitch. The proper authorities will go confiscate the boat, confiscate the cargo. They would sell it at a cheap, they would sell our ancestors at a cheap price. The government would take half of the proceeds. The snitch, who was really working for the owner of the boat, would take half of the proceeds. And then the individual owner of the boat would actually be acquiring half of the proceeds, and the government would actually be getting the other half. This was their way around the law that was passed in 1808. But this is further evidence to the fact of the existence of slave ships and our ancestors actually coming from the coast of Africa. Now, check this out. Sometimes I want to ask people, hold on, let me get a sip of my coffee. Hold on. The question I posed have not been answered by anyone yet. Are you talking about the photograph question? Like, do I have a photograph of Africans on the bottom of a boat? Nah, not in this presentation. I don't have a photograph of an African on the bottom of a boat. But to be honest with you, in this presentation, I don't have a photograph of a European on a boat either, or tobacco on a boat, or cotton on a boat. I have none of that in this presentation. But if I said they exported cotton, I don't think it would be a problem. Or if I said Europeans immigrated to the Americas, I don't think it'd be a problem. But it's all good. Check this out though. Sometimes I want to ask people, how do they think white people got to America? How do they think white people got to America? We all know that they're not from here. We all know that they from Portugal, they from Spain, they from Germany, they from the Ukraine, right? They from Britain, they from England, they from France. How did they get here? They got here on ships, family. Boatloads and boatloads and boatloads of immigrants came on ships. The same types of ships that could bring hundreds and hundreds and thousands and millions of immigrant white people over here are the same types of boats that could bring hundreds and thousands and millions of Africans. Check this out. In the Augusta Weekly Chronicle in Sentinel, this is a newspaper clipping from April 7, 1852. This is from page 7. Look, immigration. There arrived at New York on Monday the following vessels and passengers. Ship Helvetia Har, I don't have a picture for that, but apparently they brought 851. Ship Prince Albert from London, 180. Ship Robert Harding, 268. Ship Hemisphere, 404. Ship General Dunlap, 319. Ship Leviathan, 523. And ship Harriet, 76, for a total of 2,151 white folk arrived in New York on that Monday on boats. On boats. Now, I don't know where the ship Helvetia is right now. I don't know what ship Prince Albert is right now. I don't know what ship Robert Harding is right now. I don't know what ship Hemisphere. I don't know what none of these ships are right now. None. I don't have these ships, right? I can't go take you to a museum to show you these ships. I don't know what happened to them after they were decommissioned. I don't know if they sunk. I don't know if they took them apart and used the parts for other things. But what I do know is that on Monday, those ships brought in a total of 2,151 white people. You see what I'm saying? On ships. On ships. Now, yeah, I'm not even gonna get into this. I'm just gonna give y'all a brief overview. I was gonna go into this, but now I don't think I am. But basically, how I told you guys, it became illegal to import Africans from Africa to the Americas in 1808. And so what you have here is an individual who was trying to usurp that. And so what he tried to do, he wanted to offer his ship, right? And he said that he wanted to bring in African immigrants. How I just showed you that white people was immigrating to this country. He was like, oh, well, I want to bring in some African immigrants into this country. This is still like 1858. So the government is already knowing, bro, you're really just trying to supersede the laws. You know what I mean? You're not really trying to bring in no African immigrants. You really just want to get a pass to bring in some Africans so y'all can end up selling them as slaves. But matter of fact, I'm going to show you because this just goes to show people act like there were no ships that could transport people. I don't get that. Look, he says, sir, it appears from your letter of 20th April, I'm going to just read a little bit, 1858, that application has been made to you by Mears E. Lifford and Company, merchants of Charleston, South Carolina, to clear the American ship Richard Cobden, that's another ship that existed, W.F. Black Master Burton, for the coast of Africa for the purpose of taking on board African immigrants in accordance with the U.S. passenger laws and returning with the same to a port in the United States. So ships going from America to Africa, picking up people and bringing them back. It was easy. That was so easy. That was so easy work. But look, he says prior to the 1st of January 1808, the time fixed by the Constitution when Congress would be authorized to prohibit such importation, blah 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 blah. The laws indicate the strong opposition felt at that time on the African slave trade. Now, what we really got to ask ourselves is, why is all of this talk about ships bringing Africans to the Americas if there were no ships bringing Africans to the Americas? Why would they have to make a law in 1808 forbidding people from bringing shiploads of Africans from the continent of Africa to the Americas? Why would they have to do that if that wasn't happening? You know, think about it. Think about it, family. It was plenty of ships. The ships was going all back and forth across that Atlantic, man. Like, it's not even, with me, it's not even hard to understand what they were doing with these ships. Look, check this out. This is from the Philadelphia Gazette of the United States and Daily Evening Advertiser. Now, this was in the newspaper May 21st, 1795. Now, look, I say the British House of Commons speaks on abolishing the African slave trade. See, because it's almost like people want to deny that our ancestors came from Africa. But all of these records, when our ancestors speak, you got a plethora of information. Everybody is saying, even during those times back in the day, that they were getting our ancestors from Africa and bringing them here. Now, yes, again, I gotta say it again, there were people already here. Yeah, I don't deny that, but we're not gonna pretend like the slave trade not real, because if it wasn't, what is all of this about? In the 1700s, what is this about? Look, the following being the last debate in the British House of Commons on the slave trade, we believe has not been published in the United States. So in the United States, they decided to publish the debate that was going on in Britain about the ending of the slave trade. And when you look at the debate that they were having about the slave trade, it's obvious that our ancestors was coming from Africa on boats, on ships. Look, for this purpose, he desired the clerk to read the vote of the House for the sitting 1792, by which it appeared that they had resolved that no slaves should be imported into the British West India Islands after the 1st of January 1796. Imported from where? Africa. You can't get around it. Look, it had been admitted upon all hands as to the baneful effects produced by the slave trade upon the happiness of the unfortunate natives of Africa. So the slave trade was baneful upon the happiness of the natives of where? Africa. And how did they get from Africa to the Americas? On ships. So when someone tries to tell you that the slave ship narrative doesn't make sense, they just haven't done enough research. You see what I'm saying? They just haven't done enough research. What is the British House of Commons talking about here? We all know Britain had its filthy hands all in the slave trade. You think they didn't know where they were getting these people from? You think it's all a lie? Let's get some more references. It was proved, on the other hand, that the natives of Africa were fully capable of all the blessings of civilization if an end were but put to this abominable traffic. How could ending the slave trade affect the natives of Africa if the slave trade wasn't imposed on the natives of Africa? You understand what I'm saying? Our ancestors was brought from Africa. But this was not the only view in which this publication was to be taken. From it, the effects of the trade with respect to civilization would be found. The natives of Africa would not be considered as those degenerate brutes they have been falsely described. On the contrary, they would be understood as a mild, benevolent race full of justice and humanity, eager after knowledge and progressive in improvement. What they're talking about is, we understand that the African has been looked down on in multiple societies for hundreds of years because the African was enslaved in so many different places. And they began to view the Africans as nothing more than a servant class. Why would the Africans in Africa be viewed in a negative light if they were not the victims, the primary victims of the slave trade? They're not saying that, the Native Americans, the indigenous people, the Indians are looked at as degenerate brutes because of the slave trade. If it all happened to them, if the majority of the slave trade was an aggression on them, why aren't they mentioned here? Why is Africa even being brought up? Why is the whole world looking at the African in such a way? And again, I showed in one of my other videos, and this just really this just the nail in the coffin. The African nations have apologized for their role in the slave trade. They apologize. You got African nations that they have come out and said, hey, look, we know what we did. We know we sold our fellow Africans to the Europeans to be enslaved. We're sorry. We're sorry. So we know they did it. We know they got blood on their hands because they apologized. You feel me? It appeared that the inhabitants there were infinitely more civilized than those upon the coast, that they could read and write. Talking about the people in the interior. In the interior of Africa, they were infinitely more civilized than those upon the coast. And when I'm telling you guys about the African nations that are apologizing for selling other African tribes into slavery, it was several African nations on the coast. They went into the interior of Africa. They were kidnapping children. They were kidnapping men and women. They were going to war with other tribes, chaining them up, tying them up. They were dragging them to the coast, and they were selling them to the Europeans by the millions. The Dahomey tribe, one of the worst. That's Benin. Today, that's Benin. Dahomey is Benin. They the ones on the coast who were going into the interior of Africa, snatching up our ancestors. So really, like, if you native, that's fine. But when people try to say that, oh, there were no slave ships that were bringing Africans, that's so disrespectful to the individuals, to them children that was kidnapped, to the men and women that was snatched away from their home. Some of them jumped overboard and committed suicide rather than come over here and be enslaved. All the families and tribes and nations that were broken up and left destitute because of the slave trade, to come today and say that that didn't happen, when we got all of the evidence that proved that it happened. And like I showed you guys in the beginning, when you look into the narratives of what the enslaved people that were enslaved themselves, matter of fact, I'm gonna come right back to here. I just want to do something. This person was actually enslaved. Forget me. Forget anybody that's alive right now. Forget those newspaper articles. Forget it all. Let's talk to somebody that was actually enslaved. The enslaved person said, my father's name was George and my mother's name was Nellie. My father was born in Africa. Do we rewrite his history for him? My father was born in Africa. Do we rewrite my grandma and grandpa come here in a steamboat? The man come to Africa and say, huh? Yes. Well, does I remember my granny from Africa and straight from there. If we just look at the record that our ancestors left, they tell us. They tell us where they was from. They tell us what happened to them. They tell us. Huh? The oldest ones come right from Africa. My grandmother was one of them. So he had pouring out his heart, leaving these records for us so we can trace back, find our real roots, understand what happened to us, and then we just dismiss it. Now, remember when I told you guys that I was going to come back to the conversation about the royalty? Even the royalty wasn't safe, because we seen one of our enslaved ancestors said that they were the children of a chief. And the individual may think, oh, they just making that up. They just want to make it seem like they was something important in Africa. Well, look at this, family. Now, this was in the Newport Mercury newspaper, August 20th, 1792. Again, I'm taking you guys into the 1700s. And I'm showing you the facts of the case. Excuse me. Mr. Barber, as some persons have attempted to justify the African slave trade as commercial system, you are requested to insert in your paper the following speech delivered in the British Parliament by Mr. Thornton, a merchant of distinguished respectability, in which he reprobates the trade as a disgrace to the mercantile character. Look, Mr. Thornton said He was under the necessity of rising for the purpose of remarking that the two honorable gentlemen who had spoke before him had not said anything relating to the chief and only proposition before the House, the abolition of the slave trade from Africa. Now, this is another person speaking before the House of Commons in Britain when they were leading up to abolishing the slave trade. And this gentleman is standing up and he's basically saying the two gentlemen before him that spoke, they said nothing to the cause of why they're there. What was the cause for why they were there? To talk about the abolition of the slave trade from Africa. They're clear. Everybody is clear. From the individuals in the United States, from the individuals in Britain, to the individuals in Africa that's apologizing for the slave. They part in the slave trade right now. To our ancestors who was actually enslaved. Everybody is consistent with the same story. The abolition of the slave trade from Africa. They knew they were going to Africa getting our ancestors. Look, he was a merchant as well as the honorable gentleman who spoke immediately before him, and he confessed that in all trades there might be dishonorable branches, from which he wished particularly to rescue the character of that profession to which he belonged. The slave trade was a crime. It was not a trade, because they were taking these ships, going back and forth, and they were doing business with everything, including flesh, right? They were trading cotton, they were trading wine, they were trading tea, they were trading gunpowder, they were trading all kind of stuff the same way they do now. But just sometimes stuff may come on planes, but a lot of stuff is still going on cargo ships. You see them big cargo ships taking stuff from one place to the next, one country to the next, one continent to the next. That's what they were doing. And it's just as part of that trade with these same ships, they was dealing in flesh. He says the dreadful scenes. See, this is what they want us to forget or act like did not happen. The dreadful scenes of kidnapping, murder, and ravage, which universally accompanied it, rendered it incumbent on every member of that house and on himself in particular to endeavor to rescue the character of his country. Kidnapping, murder, and ravage on the Africans, right? On the Africans and on commercial men from the foul imputations to which both must be liable while that trade was carried on. And again, he's trying to speak to why the African slave trade should be stopped, because it's leaving a stain on the country of Britain. Okay, now look, check this out. Check this out. Check this out, family. My friend, let me back up a little bit. That may be a little. Look to the one on the right. Okay, look. Where my mouse is moving. Mr. Thornton then related some nefarious practices that had been adopted near the settlement of Sierra Leone. I don't think I got to show y'all a map. Y'all know that's Africa, right? Sierra Leone. The relations of a king of a neighboring district had been kidnapped by Captain Cox and sold in the West Indies. This circumstance induced the king to transmit the following letter to the Sierra Leone settlers. My subjects and the subjects of other kings have been stolen away by the inhabitants of all nations who visit this coast. What coast? The coast of Africa, the west coast of Africa. 3 of my own relations have been taken away by Captain Cox and sold for slaves. For what reason, I know not. I never molested the property or persons of others. I love the natives of Great Britain. I have borne many results from them, which have occasioned me to be something so which have occasioned me to be silent so long, whether I shall see my relations again, I know not, but those who took them will be called to account for their actions one day or another. So what happened was they were going about in the quote unquote West Indies, the Americas, and they were gathering information about the horrors of slavery. Wait, hold that thought. Let me see. Q Andy says they came on ships along with pigs, chicken, and horse. Yeah, other things were traded too. I have no problem with that. I can't speak for Mr. Hayes, but for me, the important thing is the time frame in which immigration took place. Okay. Brittany Harden says, I know for a fact that my ancestors, my grandfather's side, were from West Africa. He used to always talk about his Geechee roots. Hotel can't be denied. It can't be denied. We cannot change history. We cannot change history. And so y'all seen in one of those slave narratives, I showed y'all where the ancestor said, hold on, right here, he says, they was the children of a chief of the Kiochi tribe, right? So this ancestor says that his ancestors were children of the chief that were actually snatched up. Now, I'm not saying that this is a reference to him. I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is some people may try to say that, oh, they're lying. No chiefs, no kings. It was all small town fish that was snatched up on the coast of Africa. No, nobody was immune. What you had was these individuals, when they were trying to promote abolition in Britain, they were going around through the West Indies and they were documenting the horrors of slavery on the plantation. Now, while they were there, they ran into someone who was enslaved, who was actually a king from Africa. And he was from an area that was near to a settlement of Sierra Leone, a settlement of Europeans. Remember, they settled along the coast. Sometimes they kidnapped, sometimes they stole, but a good majority of the time they stayed on the coast, and it was other African nations that kidnapped our ancestors and sold them to them. But you have a king who was kidnapped and sold off into slavery. So even royalty, even African royalty came over here in chains. And some of their family members came over here in chains as well. Now, again, when people try to say that the slave trade isn't real and that there were no ships, they're really denying the horrors that our ancestors faced. This is from the Philadelphia Gazette of the United States, April 17, 1790. Again, we're still in the 1700s. I highlighted the pertinent parts. That the slave trade on the coast of Africa is not excused by these principles. Again, slave trade on the coast of Africa. Okay? Slave trade on the coast of Africa. We got to drill that point home. They say it was no slave ships. Our ancestors didn't come on slave ships. Our ancestors aren't from Africa. Well, everybody disagrees. The natives are excited to war. With this, the wickedness begins. The slaves, torn away from parents, wives, children, from their friends and companions, their fields and flocks, their home and country, are transported to the European settlements in America with no other accommodation on shipboard than what is provided for brutes. So when individuals like the brother Rod Hayes, if you're a native, Rod Hayes, if you ever see this, that's fine with me. But can you please stop teaching that there were no slave ships. Because when you do that, you deny these parents, wives, children, friends, companions who were snatched away from everything that they ever known. Right? You're saying that the horrors that they endured aren't real and aren't relevant. And that's just, we can't do that. We can't do that. We can't change history. If you're a Native American, if you're indigenous, that's fine. I got no problem with it. Some of my ancestors, I've done my genealogical research. I can go back far. In my genealogy. You see what I'm saying? Like I know names, dates, places, locations. I've studied myself, right? And some of my ancestors were married. I have an ancestor that was married to a Cherokee, an ancestor that was married to a Comanche. I have some ancestors in my lineage, they were mulatto. Now, I don't know exactly what they were mixed with, but I know they were mulatto, so they were mixed with something. They were a mixed breed. So, I'm not saying I'm 100% African blood. That's not what I'm saying. I know better. And so I know that, there were natives here. There were indigenous people here. I can't deny that. And some of you may be indigenous. You may be an Indian. You may be native, whatever term you want to go by. That may be you. But in order to claim that heritage, you do not need to say that the slave ship narrative is unreasonable and illogical, because the slave ship narrative is facts. It's actual facts, and we can overload with evidence for this all day. And our ancestors, they tell us this themselves. So did our ancestors come on ships? What is the evidence? Yes, they did. Now, you know what? Before I end this, I want to do one more thing. Because maybe Q and did Hater. I don't know if you're still in the building, but you might be. Now, you were talking about pictures of the slave ships. Now, I told you I don't have no pictures in this presentation. I'm not gonna pretend like I do. But I want you to look on your screen, and you can take a quick screenshot. Look at that link, and you can go to this website right here. Pull up this page right here, and it will actually give you the names of some of these slave ships, where they came from, what year they operated in, where they picked some of the quote unquote slaves from, where they dropped them off, and perhaps if you study through this, you can find some pictures of a slave on a ship. I don't know. I didn't actually look for that. But look, check this out. Right here, we have a vessel name of Trelawney. That's something that you can research that slave ship name, see what you find. Flag is Great Britain, so we know this is a Great Britain slave ship. Place constructed, Bristol. Year constructed, 1781. This is a lot of good information that can get you started. Maybe you'll find that picture you're looking for. Tonnage, 319. Guns mounted, 6. Vessel owners, James Rogers, Richard Blake, John Purnell. All of this information can get you right there. You might find some pictures, but this is what we're looking for. Look at this. Outcome of voyage for slaves. They talking about ships. Here's a ship. Outcome of voyage for slaves. Slaves disembarked in America. Okay, but look, check this out. This is what I'm gonna look at. First place of slave purchase. Now I don't know if you, matter of fact, see if I can highlight. Yeah, there we go. Boom. First place of slave purchase. Bonny. That's Africa. Okay. Bonny. Okay. Look. First region of slave purchase. Bight of Biafra and Gulf of Guinea Islands. That's Africa. That's also the principal, the principal region of slave purchase, the same place. And right under that, the first region of slave landing is Jamaica. They brought them to Jamaica, sold them off. You see? You see? You can get all this information is right there. Look. Number of slaves. Now that ain't when we look. Total. Let's look at this. Total slaves embarked. 333. See that? Look. Number of slaves arriving at first place of landing. Look, 313. So with this one ship, we got a documented 313 ancestors. That's with this one ship. So, I mean, now I showed y'all all that other stuff. I could have started with this. But I wanted to end with this. So they want to know about the ships. Look, this will tell you everything, man. Vessel name. You got the vessel name. You got the country that ran it, the year it was constructed, how many tons it could carry, who were the captains of the ship, who owned the ships at various times. Where did they pick the slaves up from? They kept records, fam. Maybe not necessarily a picture, but they kept records. And we have these records. Look, this is the part of the database. This part of the database on that same website, slavevoyages.org. Okay? Look, right here, I want to show you something. With a hand net. Principal place where captives were purchased. Mozambique. Cambinda, I'm not sure where that's at. But Mozambique. You see? You got the vessel names. You got the year they arrived with slaves. Let's start at the left. You got the year they arrived with the slaves in tow. The voyage ID number. They put this information all nice and neat for us. You got the vessel name. Help you with all of your research right here. Look up all of these names. Perhaps you will find the images that you're looking for, right? Places where the vessel or vessel voyage began. So these are where the vessels came from. Principal place where captives were purchased. You can see where they went and got them from, the quote unquote slaves from. Principal place where captives were landed. Where did they drop them off at? And look, linked voyages. Then you have captives arrived at first port. How many captives? 290, 223, 350, 342, 516, 515. And you even have the captain's name. You see? And this is just, it's way more information on this website right here. There's a lot more information on this website right here than I'm actually showing y'all. Okay, so yeah, you can go there, and you can go there and find all of that stuff. So the brother Rod Hayes tells Sa Neter, we did not come on ships. Now, brother, with all due respect, perhaps your ancestors did not come on ships. But let's not act like nobody ancestors came on ships. Now, it's tons of other evidence and information that I could have crammed into this video, but it would have been too long, and I would have been talking entirely too long. And all good things eventually must come to an end. But what I want to end on is this. This is what I want to end on, and then we're going to get out of here, family. Out of all that I said, this is what holds the most weight to me. What our ancestors said themselves. I remember my granny from Africa and straight from there. I believe you. Okay? I believe you. My grandma and grandpa come here in a steamboat. The man come to Africa and say, you know what, Richard Carruthers, I believe you. I believe you more than I believe the good brother Rod Hayes. My father's name was George and my mother's name was Nellie. My father was born in Africa. Thomas Jones, I believe you, Thomas Jones. Uh, Ancestor John Brown. Most of the time, there was more than 300 slaves on the plantation. The oldest ones come right from Africa. My grandmother was one of them. I believe you, bro. I believe you, man. I believe you. I believe you. Because all of the evidence points to that. All of the evidence points to that. So I hope you guys enjoyed this presentation. I hope you guys like how I put that together. And I hope I answered as many questions as I could. QAnon did. I'm going to go back and do some further research to see if I can find a specific type of picture that you're looking for. And I'm going to try to put it in another video because that probably would be good to actually have a picture of our ancestors on the bottom of a slave ship. I didn't even think to try to pull that up. I was trying to get the actual documentation. That's a good question. You know, I always got to respect a good question. Don't have that picture. You know, got to be honest about that. But honestly, I think I've shown enough to verify that you know the slave trade is real. They were actually getting people from Africa, and everybody that's the actual historical story. Boys say they can't be the Ontarians Indians ancestors if the Indian arrived in North America 10,000 years. No, I'm not saying the African is the ancestor of the Indian. That's not what I'm saying. No, I'm saying the African is the ancestor of me, right? And I'm saying that those individuals on that plantation, on those plantations, their ancestors came from Africa. Now, yes, some Indians or natives, they were enslaved too. That's true. They were enslaved right alongside the Africans. But I'm not saying that the Africans are the ancestors of the Indian. No, they their own people. Indians, Native Americans, Ontarians, Indians, if you like that word. Yeah, they were here. Like I saw you mentioned it earlier, how you said the 10,000 years, like that Clovis civilization. They didn't. I don't believe they had any type of writing, so we don't know what they were actually writing. But yeah, people been over here for thousands and thousands and thousands of years before Europeans got over here. Even when the Vikings was here before the British and the French actually showed up. When the Vikings showed up, in the Viking sagas, they have the first literature from the first Vikings that came over here. They encountered natives when they got here. You understand what I'm saying? So I do know that it was already people here, and I know those people weren't white people. I get that 100%. The only thing is when I was watching Sarnetta, I heard the guy say that this basically like the slave ship narrative was false. So I was like, well, you know what? It definitely was slave ships. Those slave ships definitely picked people up from Africa and brought them over here, right? And enslaved them on plantations. That definitely happened. Regardless of whether it was already people here or not, that's part of the history too that we can't deny. We can't deny that. And so I wanted to do a presentation to verify that. So yeah, no doubt, man. You're more than welcome. Hey, and I appreciate the interaction that you gave me in the chat. You too, Brittany Harden, you're more than welcome. I thank you for the interaction that you gave me in the chat as well, because that helped move the conversation along and to guide me into different things. I like seeing comments in the chat that really helps out, because it makes you feel like you're not talking to yourself. Right? It makes you feel like you're not talking to yourself. So I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. And again, I know Native Americans, Ontarians, I know they were already here, but those slave ships did go to Africa. they did break up families, and they did bring individuals over here, and they enslaved them as well. So I'm about to tap out. I'll be back with another presentation in a few days. I'm working on something. Thanks for watching Matthew Daniels TV. I'm your brother, Matthew Daniels, the author, the writer, the scribe, and the bookworm. But I'm not just a bookworm world. I am the real bookworm. Make sure you get it right. I got 16 published books out right now, and I'm definitely going to write more. I'm doing the book game like it ain't never been done before, and I'm doing the book game like it'll probably never be done again. May your name live on forever, and may your memory family, never die. Hotel, I'm out.